To truly comprehend the sheer, staggering magnitude of the man they called the Duke, you have to look beyond the dusty trails of Monument Valley and the flickering shadows of the silver screen. You have to leave the solid ground behind and step onto the weathered teak decks of a steel giant. For decades, the world perceived John Wayne as a creature of the earth, a man carved from the very rock of the American West, a figure synonymous with the desert heat and the high plains. But as the shadows of his long, storied life began to stretch and darken, he found his true, final sanctuary in the restless, unforgiving, and vast embrace of the Pacific Ocean. This was not the typical story of a wealthy Hollywood star seeking a weekend escape on a pristine, white yacht. This was the dark, complex, and deeply personal saga of the Wild Goose. The Wild Goose was not a vessel born of vanity or a desire for luxury. It was a 300-ton, 136-foot former World War II minesweeper, a beast of the sea originally known as the USS YMS-328. It was built for one thing and one thing only: war. It was designed to glide through treacherous waters, hunting for hidden lethality beneath the waves. When John Wayne first laid eyes on that rugged, salt-caked hull in the early 1960s, he didn't see a pleasure craft. He saw a kindred spirit. He saw a vessel that had served its country with honor, a machine that was hardened by years of grueling service, and a frame that remained unyielding in the face of the most violent storms. He saw himself. He spent a literal fortune, not just on mahogany and leather, but on ensuring that the ship's military soul remained intact. He wanted a fortress, not a toy. The interior of the Goose was a labyrinth of heavy steel, reinforced bulkheads, and thick, bulletproof glass. It was a place where a man of his immense stature could finally disappear. In Hollywood, every move he made was scrutinized by studio bosses. Every smile was captured by the paparazzi, and every word was analyzed by the press. But on the Wild Goose, the only laws that mattered were the ancient, unwritten laws of the sea. The only commander was the Duke himself, standing tall on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the blue of the water met the gray of the sky. It was here, amidst the smell of diesel, salt spray, and expensive tobacco, that Marion Morrison could finally set aside the heavy cloak of John Wayne and just be a man. But as the 1960s bled into the 70s and the Cold War reached a fever pitch, the Wild Goose transformed into something far more mysterious than a private retreat. You must remember the climate of that era. It was a time of global paranoia, a grand chessboard where every move was a potential catastrophe. John Wayne was a fierce, uncompromising patriot, a man who believed in the American cause with a religious fervor. And there are stories, persistent, whispered accounts from the docks of Newport Beach down to the sun-scorched piers of La Paz, that the Goose was far more than it appeared to be. Legends suggest the vessel was outfitted with state-of-the-art surveillance equipment and long-range radio gear that far surpassed anything a civilian should ever possess. The rumors suggest that the Duke didn't just sail for the trophy fish, he sailed for the flag. It is whispered in intelligence circles that during his frequent and often secretive voyages to the remote waters off the Mexican coast and the silent reaches of the Gulf of California, the Wild Goose served as a mobile, floating observation post for the United States government. The theory is that while the world thought he was merely drinking tequila and playing poker with his inner circle, his ship was silently monitoring the coastlines, listening to the clandestine airwaves of Soviet and Cuban agents, and providing a covert vantage point that no official Navy vessel could occupy without causing a diplomatic incident. He was the ultimate patriot, and the Goose was his silent partner in a game of global shadows. Life on board was a masterclass in rugged discipline and profound, almost spiritual solitude. Imagine the scene. It is 3 o'clock in the morning. The world is draped in a heavy, velvet blackness, and the massive Pacific swells are crashing against the bow with the force of a sledgehammer. There, in the dim, red-lit glow of the bridge, stands the Duke. He isn't the movie star in that moment. He is a seasoned mariner. He knew every bolt in that ship, every rhythmic thrum of the massive engines, and every groan of the steel frame as it battled the currents. He would spend weeks, sometimes months, at sea, often with nothing but the endless horizon for company. The ocean didn't care about his Oscar nominations or his box office power. The ocean only demanded respect, strength, and the will to survive, the very pillars upon which he had built his entire legendary career. This maritime sanctuary was also a fortress against a world that was becoming increasingly hostile to the values he stood for. The Duke lived under the shadow of constant threats, alleged Soviet assassination plots, radical domestic groups, and the general erosion of the traditional America he championed. On the Wild Goose, he was protected by miles of deep, dark water. He surrounded himself with a hand-picked, fiercely loyal crew who understood the value of silence. Every departure was treated like a military operation. Every anchorage was a calculated strategic move. He would vanish into the uncharted coves of the Sea of Cortez, far beyond the reach of any telephone, telegram, or process server. In those secret bays, the icon and the man became indistinguishable, a lone titan standing on the deck, silhouetted against a blood-red Mexican sunset. The cabin of the Wild Goose was his true inner sanctum. It was a masculine world of dark woods, heavy brass fittings, and the lingering scent of his favorite cigars. It was a place of permanence in a world of fleeting fame. As his health began its long, painful decline, the ship became more than a hobby. It became his life support. The steady, low-frequency vibration of the engines seemed to synchronize with the beating of his own weary heart. He found a strange, mechanical comfort in the machinery. He believed that as long as the Goose stayed afloat, as long as those engines kept turning, he could hold back the tide of time itself. It was a fierce battle of wills between a man who refused to be broken and a sea that never stopped its relentless assault. In those final, poignant voyages, the atmosphere on the ship changed. The laughter of his friends grew quieter, and the Duke's time on the bridge became more about reflection than navigation. He would sit for hours on the fantail, his gaze fixed on the churning white wake of the ship as it vanished into the vast blue void behind them. He saw the world he knew disappearing. The classic heroes were being replaced by anti-heroes. The clear-cut morality of the West was being clouded by cynicism. But on the decks of the Wild Goose, the old code still held absolute power. Honor, unwavering loyalty, and the quiet, stoic courage of a man facing his fate were the only currencies that mattered. It was his final stronghold, his private Alamo on the water. When you study the history of this ship today, you see a monument to John Wayne's absolute need for autonomy. It was the only place on Earth where no director could tell him where to stand, no studio lawyer could negotiate his spirit, and no enemy could easily find his trail. It was a vessel of deep secrets, a silent witness to the private, unvarnished thoughts of a man who carried the heavy burden of being the face of an entire nation. The salt water has long since washed away his physical footsteps, but the aura of the Duke still haunts those decks. The legend of the floating fortress lives on, a ghost ship of American history, forever sailing through the mists of our collective memory, guarding the final, deepest secrets of a man who refused to be conquered by land, by politics, or by the sea. This was the ultimate hidden chapter, the maritime mystery of the cowboy who found his true soul in the deep. The Wild Goose was his silent companion through the coldest nights of the Cold War, a steel sanctuary that kept the world at bay while he fought the most difficult battles of his life. Even now, if you stand on the coast of California and listen closely over the sound of the crashing waves, you can almost hear the low, thunderous rumble of those warship engines and see the silhouette of a man in a captain's hat, forever watching the horizon, forever guarding the secrets that lie beneath the surface. He was the master of the desert, yes, but in the end, he was the king of the sea.